All right, let's do something a little crazy. We're going to dive into one of the most notoriously difficult books ever written, James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. But don't worry, you can put the book down. We're not reading the whole thing. Instead, we're going to crack open just one tiny story hidden inside of it, a story about how a rumor gets started. You see a sentence like this, and your first reaction is probably to run away screaming. It feels like complete gibberish, right? I mean, what does it even mean to snore alcoherently? It seems like a puzzle that's just impossible to solve. But what if I told you that underneath all that complicated language is something we've all done? Something super simple. This entire confusing episode is basically a fancy literary game of telephone. And together we're going to follow this little rumor from its very first whisper all the way to its wild final form. So how's this going to work? Well, the story unfolds in three main stages, just like that game you played as a kid. We're going to see a piece of gossip get overheard, then completely twisted in a drunken dream, and finally, it gets turned into a piece of public art. Okay, Act 1. Our story kicks off with a little bit of eavesdropping. We're at the Baldoyle racetrack, just outside of Dublin. You can just imagine it, the sound of horses, the buzz of the crowd, and this is where the spark of our rumor is first lit. So who are the first people to catch this rumor? Meet our guys, Treacle Tom and Frisky Shorty. As Joyce describes them, they're a couple of brothers who are pretty down on their luck. Tom is just out of pop, which is slang for fresh out of jail, and Shorty is a tipster who has come off the hulks, or the old prison ships. Basically, they're broke, just out of trouble, and they're hoping to find a score. And as they're milling about, they just happen to overhear a conversation. A passin' in the motor clobber, which is Joyce's amazing way of saying a well-dressed clergyman in driving clothes, is whispering to his buddy about some juicy story involving a guy named Mr. Adams. Now, Tom and Shorty, they only catch bits and pieces, but it's enough to plant a seed. Act 2 starts later that night. The rumor, which is still just this half-heard whisper, has now traveled from the racetrack to a real dive of a lodging house in Dublin. And this is where things get really weird, because the story is about to get completely mangled by booze and sleep. So Treacle Tom has had himself a night. He's passed out in a flophouse, and he is, in Joyce's perfect word, blotto. I mean, completely wasted on gin and cheap red wine. And as he's sleeping it off, he starts mumbling, repeating that garbled story he sort of overheard at the races.
Now, Joyce could have just said Tom was talking nonsense in his sleep, but no, he does something way cooler. He makes up a brand new word to capture the moment perfectly. Tom snores the story alcoherently. So what on earth does that actually mean?
Let's just break it down. Alcoherently is what's called a portmanteau. It's two words smashed together. You've got alcoholically, because, he's drunk, and incoherently, because he's not making a lick of sense. In that one single word, Joyce tells us everything. The story is being retold through a filter of alcohol and dreams, and it's getting seriously messed up.
And who's awake to hear this drunken, garbled mess? Well, it's not the fancy folks from the racetrack, that's for sure. It's another group of guys at the bottom of the barrel. A broke draper, a homeless ex-secretary, and a street musician named Hosty, who's so down on his luck he's been thinking about ending it all. They are wide awake, and they are listening to every word.
And that brings us to Act 3. The next morning, this trio of outcasts take that misheard, drunken, dream-filtered story they heard from Treacle Tom, and they decide they're going to turn it into something completely new. This is the final and most important step in our game of telephone.
And their creative process is just wonderfully, hilariously human. They wake up, they head to a pawn shop, not to get an instrument, no, but to get back Hosty's false teeth so he can actually sing properly. Then, of course, they stop for a few drinks at a pub called the Old Sot's Hole. And after all that, fueled by a bit of morning courage, to step out onto the street, ready to perform. So just think about that for a second. A secret whisper between two rich guys at a racetrack, filtered through a drunk's dream, is now being polished into a ballad. A piece of public art to be sung on the streets of Dublin for literally anyone to hear. The rumor isn't a secret anymore. And as Joyce puts it, the world of songs is now richer because of this brand new ballad. A story that had no clear author, no clear beginning, has now been given a melody and a structure. It's not just a rumor anymore, it's a song. So, okay, why does this one weird little story matter? Because in this tiny game of telephone, Joyce is showing us something huge about how stories, how legends, and maybe even how history gets made. It's a process that was true back then, and it's definitely even more true today.
I mean, think about a word we all know, the meme. What is a meme? It's an idea that spreads from person to person, changing and evolving as it goes. Somebody makes it, somebody else shares it with a new caption, a third person turns it into a video, and it just keeps going.
And that is the absolute genius of this. What Joyce is describing here is basically the birth of a 19th century meme. A story starts as a private whisper, it gets distorted when it's retold, and then it gets remixed into a totally new format, a song, that becomes public property. It belongs to everyone and to no one. He was breaking down the mechanics of viral culture 100 years before the internet even existed.
It really leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? The next time you hear a piece of gossip or see a headline or a viral video, it's worth asking yourself, are you actually hearing the original story? Or are you just hearing the final verse of a very, very long song, one that's been passed down, twisted, and maybe, just maybe, sung a little out of coherently along the way?